one thing I've discovered is that the worst in the minds of people, gang members of the community, are the most powerful forces for change. And I think I learned that in the early 90s when our director in Lynn used to invite the leaders of the different gangs. There were about a dozen pretty distinct gangs in Lynn at that time, over to her apartment for breakfast once a month. Different gang leaders, rivals.
Okay.
And they would talk about what would you like to see in your city? And there wasn't like to crush the Bloods or to take the Crips out. It was to have safer parks, to have more jobs. Mm-hmm. So safe at night so our mothers or grandmothers could go out to the store and not be afraid. And they began to dream about what could be in the city of Lynn, rival gang members. And she began to encourage them, well, what do you think could be done? And they had the idea, well, what if we put basketball hoops back up in the parks because they were taken out because of gang violence? And they made a pitch to the mayor with our staff, and they got them put back in. And they said, well, make sure that there's no violence in there, in the parks. And they did. They navigated peace.
They were part of the decision-making process, part of the community.
And they began to be with each other. And then they came up with the idea, well, what if we start a basketball league with rival gangs? And so they organized with one of our staff a basketball tournament with it ended up being 72 gang members from 12 gangs. And they put it together and they pulled it off without a hitch. And then they started to mix the youth up.
No violence.
Now this is no violence.
No problems.
And at this time, Lynn was the second most violent city in the Commonwealth here. And then we started to see that the people who were really leading the gangs were like out of our demographic. We're juvenile offender ministry. So they were like 23, 24, the OGs, the original gangsters. And a lot of them were locked up in the county jail, in the segregated gang blocks. And so we started to go in there and work with those guys. And I remember being in one of those meetings when one of the Bloods, the Bloods and the Crips, like the Republicans and the Democrats, the blue and the red.
Sure, yeah.
So one of the Bloods on the gang block wrote a letter to have read to the Crips, and I still have it, and it said, I'd be willing to take a bullet for you guys, you Crips, if it could bring peace to our streets of Lynn. And they heard it, and they were like, well, what could we do? And we organized with the administration coming on board a 3-day event we called Ready for Life, where we brought together 16 of the Bloods and 16 Crips leaders in Lynn. Now they'd all violated against each other. They all knew each other. We brought them together for 3 days. And we did this intensive leadership development. This Ready for Life program came out of something I experienced that for the business community, cost $2,500. The guy that designed it with me did it with Disney, ABC, ESPN executives. We reworked it, same material for gang leaders. We didn't dumb it down. We did it 3 days, and those guys reconciled. They asked each other forgiveness. And we didn't even tell them to do it, but that's what came out of it. They were then put back into their segregated gang blocks where they're locked down 23 hours a day. So 120 guys in the gang units out of 1,400 in the county jail. And they navigated peace on the streets of Lynn.
Wow.
That weekend, we would run a basketball league. Bloods one Friday, Crips the next, Bloods, and they all came together. We said, what's going on? They said, no, peace has been already all negotiated from inside. And the city started to change. Now, Lynn's not even in the top 10 most violent cities anymore. But the story that's not really told is how these guys who were the supposed problems got on the same page for a vision bigger than just, snuffing each other out. To what do we want to see in our city? And we hired a bunch of those guys on our staff. They didn't all work out, but they were rivals who began to serve together.
Wow.
And so I think that's, when I talk about rewriting the narrative of who these kids are, they're a very small segment of the population, but they commit over half the crimes. So they would be strategic that way. They're leaders, they, one of them, is very expensive if we don't step in and work with them.
Sure.
$2.1 million, one kid over his lifetime of lost taxes and cost of incarceration, et cetera, et cetera. I just don't understand why we're not a lot more intentional about getting these kids, especially when they're in a place where they're open.